Now I'm going to talk about analyzing the audience a little bit. This is the really first piece to think about when you're considering a topic for speech or how to organize it. And really what I want you to be able to do is to think of yourself as being audience-centered rather than being speaker-centered. I think this is something we have seen enough where someone is being self-congratulatory and patting themselves on the back about listen to how brilliant I am when they're giving a speech. But often they're not really talking to you, they're just talking at you. And I would rather be able to talk with and to an audience. And so one of the things that we would do is, I kind of talk about this as if you've ever waited tables in a restaurant or had a good server, one of the things that you have seen them do or that you may have done is to preempt the needs of your customers. What is it that they may need? If you look over and see that their drink is less than half full, bring a new one. You don't have to wait for them to ask for it. So in a lot of ways, if you do this with your speech, if you know you're going to say something that they don't understand, say it and then immediately tell them what that means instead of waiting for them to say, I don't know what you're talking about. Immediately give that information and know what they need and don't need and include what they need and don't include what they don't need. So the things to kind of think about are attitudes, beliefs, values, and behaviors of your audience. Your attitudes are your likes and your dislikes. If they don't like your topic, then you have to be able to include content that addresses that. Beliefs and values are a little more ingrained. They are sort of enduring beliefs or thoughts about how the world operates and what is worthwhile. And if you know that you're talking to a particularly religious group, then there's going to be a certain set of assumptions you can make about what kinds of things may be valuable and not valuable. And you need to take that into account when you're speaking with them. And then lastly, about considering behaviors, a lot of times your attitudes, beliefs, and values are difficult to determine. But if you can observe someone's behavior, you can infer or make assumptions about or guesses about what it is that they like, dislike, value, and not value. So, for instance, at our house, we, whenever possible, hang our laundry outside rather than the dryer. Now, we don't explain to people when we walk outside, like, hey, neighbor, we care about the environment. But more, it's that you can see it and you can see they're hanging their laundry outside instead of doing it inside. And so that must mean they prefer to do that over the dryer. And what does that mean? And then you can make some assumptions about the kinds of people that we are. So there's lots of things you can consider about audience and the characteristics about them. And the Zarefsky book includes a lot of these, and you can't possibly take all of these into account. Some of these you couldn't possibly know. Just who is it that you want to know, that you want to talk to? A lot of times your audience may only contain a small snippet of your actual target audience. So if you're trying to convince people not to smoke and you're talking to a general audience, the majority probably doesn't smoke. And so you have to know that you're not really talking to a lot of the people in the room. Things like demographics, just age, sex, race, things like that sometimes are useful to know. Cultural backgrounds can be important. So if they are more likely to defer to an authority figure or not. Socioeconomic status can change and be related to a lot of times education level. So if you're using terminology that the audience won't know, then you need to make sure that you're meeting the needs of the audience that's in front of you. Religion, political affiliation, gender, occupation, I mean, the list goes on and on about the kinds of things that make up an individual. And when you mix a bunch of people together, sometimes it's hard to get a real snippet. So you have to sort of pick your battles and the things that you think will be important. Inevitably, you'll miss something, but if you're making an attempt, a lot of times that gets rewarded by your audience. So how do you figure out who you're talking to? Well, in some ways, you operate with stereotypes, and not necessarily negative stereotypes, but if you're talking to a bunch of professors who think that they're smart, you're probably going to expect that they're going to want to hear some big words just to show, hey, look, I'm smart too. Or if you're talking to a group of elderly women, you're probably not going to be swearing at them a lot. That won't be necessarily something that they expect. And so there are certain kinds of things that you can usually go with. But in other cases, you may be able to interview or just speak to a couple of your target audience and get some idea of the kinds of characteristics that they contain. Sometimes surveys or other public sources are available to kind of get some idea of who you're talking to. Generally speaking, when we're doing the kinds of public speaking we're talking about in this class, you're just taking a guess. Do your best, have some reason as to why you're doing something, and that's probably going to be good enough. So what kinds of things to think about? Well, the setting can change the kinds of topics and the way you consider your audience. So what do you want to cover? What is your purpose of your speech? In the class, I will provide you the general purpose: to inform, to persuade, to introduce. I will give the general overall goal of the speech. The specific purpose is, what will you do about that general purpose? So if the purpose is to persuade, you will persuade about X, whatever that topic may be. So you're just getting a little more specific. And so with that, the kinds of purposes we will deal with are informative, persuasive, and special occasion. And special occasion is just everything else that doesn't fit. So an after-dinner speech, which is usually something that is comedic, or a speech of introduction, or a speech of welcome, or a dedication, or a eulogy, or a toast. Those are special occasions and take oftentimes a specific kind of form that doesn't necessarily fit into the informative or persuasive kinds of topics. So why does that matter? Well, if you think about the kinds of topics that you're going to choose, and you think about the setting, and if you think about the kinds of speeches you're going to give, and who your audience may be, and you start listing out your potential topics, it really helps you to narrow down the kinds of things that you can cover. It's not everything's available. Really, there's a finite list available given the topic, the context, the audience, etc. And that allows you to get a little more specific. So it's not just that I want to talk about this topic. It's not, I don't want to talk about growing vegetables. Well, there's an awful lot to do about that topic. Which vegetable? And in which condition? And for people who know about it, am I informing you, or am I trying to convince you to use a specific kind of variety of cucumber to grow, or a specific kind of soil and how that changes what you need to do, and that I want you to go buy that particular product? So a lot of times when you narrow things down and get more specific, a lot of times that helps you to determine what your purpose really is. That I wanted to inform, but as I start thinking about it, I'm persuading, and that's really what I wanted to do. And so to kind of be upfront about what it is that you want to do. And time constraints also play a role. If you can't get to the persuading point, then you have to be satisfied with simply informing and hope they can do something about it. And a lot of times there might just simply be a challenge that you can't think about. So if the goal is to try to make your audience laugh and it doesn't work, if that's all you wanted to accomplish, then it wasn't a very good speech. But if your goal is to inform, and maybe I want to kind of be funny along the way, then you can at least accomplish your primary goal, even if you don't get your secondary goal of trying to be entertaining. So I'm going to kind of give you a brief example of what a speech kind of looks like, and then talk a little bit about the first assignment at the end. So my general purpose and topic is just about me. I'm going to talk about me. And so what specifically I want to tell you is that I'm a giver, that I give of myself. And so my specific purpose would be, I want to persuade you that I'm helpful. More specific than that, narrowing it down, my thesis would be, Josh is helpful to those he knows and those he doesn't know. So based on that, you should know that. If nothing else, that's all you can remember, is that I'm helpful. So here's what my speech might look like. And so I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, and you can pause the video and look at some of the content to kind of see how it's laid out. But I would start with talking about, during college, I spent some summers working as a mental health professional in a state-run facility for mentally disabled adults. And it was something that didn't pay very well, but I felt really rewarded in that I was able to be there in a job that was severely understaffed because people didn't want to do that kind of work. And I was able to be there and to help out, and it was really necessary work for those individuals, and I could have had a better job, but that wouldn't have really felt like I did something like I did when I was working in that facility. And so what I want you to know about me based on that experience is that I'm helpful to people that I know and people that I don't know very well. And to kind of demonstrate that, I'm going to talk about how I help with the research team and help with students. So first, I help with my research team that I am part of. So these are often people that I know, that I've had classes with, either taught or been a student of, or just sort of worked closely with. And I do more than I often need to, because there are others who simply don't have some of those skills. So we have divided up our responsibilities, and I know that one part of the team just doesn't know how to do some of the statistical analyses, and so I will come help out and do that part to make sure that that team member is meeting their obligations and the team can move forward. So as you can see, I can help someone that I know, but I also help people that I don't know very well. And to show that, I'm going to talk about how I voluntarily help students that I don't know. And I have substitute taught in Chicago Public Schools, and I've assisted in other classes in which I have not been the instructor. Because I think the more help you can provide to students to learn, the better it is going to be. And I don't often know their names, I often don't hear their names, but I'm able to provide some guidance and some of my expertise and just add an additional resource to students who a lot of times just need a little extra help. And I am happy to be there and provide that help even if I never see them again. So even though I don't know these students, I can help them anyway. So as you can see, I help my research team and I help students from a variety of places, and hopefully with those two experiences, you can see that I am helpful to people that are familiar to me and to which I am unfamiliar. So while I was at school, I went back home every summer and to work at that mental health facility again, even though I could have stayed in the Chicago area and had a much better job and paid more, but it just wouldn't have been very helpful to very many. So what you just saw was a speech of introduction. I told you something about myself. And so your first speech in this class is a speech of introduction in which you will speak for about 90 seconds, which is just a minute and a half. It's not asking very much. And what you have to really think about is, what do you want your audience to know? A lot of times you're going to be speaking to people who know you, and so you have to really go back to the drawing board of what I really want to tell them. You want to focus on the introduction and conclusion, and the speech is worth 100 points, and I want to see that you have adapted to your audience, you're doing something to grab their attention. There's some sort of developed body or story or presentation that you are delivering, and then you're leaving us with some sort of lasting impression. But specifically in the assignment sheet, you're going to see that it talks about wanting to tell us about something that you're proud of. And so that may not necessarily be something that your audience knows about you, even if it's people that know you. And so you should be able to find something to talk about.